this looks sort of like my classes at Tarrant County College, Weatherford College, which everybody crowds to the back rows. Nobody wants to be on the front row. And I know it couldn't possibly be me. So if you looked at the program for today, and if you were here this morning for when Gail Hansen spoke, you may be asking yourself, what am I doing on the program? How did I wind up here? Because it looks like the way the program is set up, almost like Black History Month. And then here's somebody dropped in the middle of that talking about something to do with Fort Worth history. And also, what am I doing on the program? Because if you look behind me, I have no PowerPoint and no slideshow. And as I'm often reminded, how can anybody speak in the 21st century without a PowerPoint presentation and a slideshow, and or either one of the above? I don't have either. I'm the designated dinosaur. So what I want to talk about for a few minutes, and I'd encourage you, the program says, again, I don't know if you were here this morning or if you're staying cool while you're waiting for Jan Jones and Bob Ray Sanders to talk, but the program has it set up for an hour and a half. And if you're sitting back in the back because you figure if I go an hour and a half, you're out of here, I can definitely reassure you that we won't struggle on that long. But what I want to talk about is simply what's so special about Fort Worth history. And another way of saying that is what's so special about Fort Worth. Basically, it's the same question. And it's also related to, if you like it even simpler than that, what makes Fort Worth better than Dallas? And that didn't fly as a program title because you never can tell when our flyers will go over to Dallas. And you don't really want to have a Dallas mob showing up with a lynch rope looking for me. But that's kind of what we're talking about, is what makes Fort Worth special, what makes Fort Worth history special. When you leave here today, you go out the front door. I want you to turn left and go down just a couple of 3 blocks and look around you. Look at Sundance Square, look at Sundance Plaza. And you go, well, yeah, that's pretty neat stuff. How many of you, and again, we have a varying aged audience here, how many of you remember Fort Worth downtown back in the 1960s and 1970s? Remember when you could shoot off a cannon down here and not hit anybody? That was Fort Worth back then. Do you remember the stockyards, the historic stockyards back in the 50s and 60s, when the biggest thing on the weekends was live main event wrestling, the Northside Coliseum? And if that doesn't ring a bell, does the name Fritz von Erich ring a bell? All right, well, Fritz von Erich and the whole crew used to show up in the Northside Coliseum on Saturday nights, and KTVT would film it and present live main event wrestling. And some of us would go over there, and our mothers would stay home worrying that we were going to get knifed or beat up or whatever, because the stockyards wasn't a place to go. Remember when the biggest thing going on at the Fort Worth Zoo was when Pete the Python escaped? And remember the whole, if you go back and look at the newspapers, and there was front page headlines, and Pete is somewhere, and women were crying, and children being taken off the streets because Pete was going to come slithering off and eat your child, and all that kind of stuff it's no more. Today, the Stockyards is on the National Historic Register, and the Fort Worth Zoo is one of the finest in the country. And downtown Fort Worth, like I said, you go out the door and turn left and walk about 2 or 3 blocks, has Sundance Square and Sundance Plaza. And if you don't keep up with city competition, and size and everything else matters in city competition, we are a model. And I know I'm a homer, but we're a model for cities all over the country that are looking to study, how do you revive a downtown city? How do you get people to move back and live downtown? How do you get people to come downtown and spend their evenings downtown, which hadn't been happening for a long time? D Magazine did an article on Fort Worth, and no, that's not a misspeak. D Magazine did an article on Fort Worth back in 1995, which they quoted Ed Bass. And Bass said this: Fort Worth has warmth, friendliness, quality of life, coupled with vitality, sophistication, and all the other advantages of a true metropolitan city. Now, admittedly, that's spoken like a true homer, which Ed Bass was speaking as a true homer. But if you break it down to specifics, there are things that make Fort Worth special, and therefore Fort Worth history special. And probably a lot of what I want to say the next few minutes is not brand new, head-slapping revelation stuff, But if you kind of organize it and line it up, it's some stuff that makes you kind of go, it's kind of interesting. Start with the idea of Fort Worth being a gateway city. And the gateway is as in gateway to the west. And this is an idea that Amon Carter played up for all it was worth for many years. In fact, the masthead on the Star Telegram was Fort Worth, remember? City where the West begins, okay? And it wasn't just a nice masthead. There were good cultural and geographic and symbolic and social reasons for all of that. If you look at the climate and geography, Fort Worth is about on a line about the 100th, 98th to 100th meridian that represents a definite change in climate between a dry west and an eastern different type of climate. And we're not here to get into climate and all that kind of stuff. But it was a gateway city, not just in Amon Carter's mind, but we served West Texas. And that was one of the things we had over Dallas. Dallas is where the east petered out. And Fort Worth's where the west began. And for a time, many years, the Star Telegram was the biggest circulation paper, certainly in Texas, if not in the Southwest. And part of that was because we were the paper of record that people in West Texas got, that they received. So that was part of it also. There's a long string, another reason that Fort Worth is special or different. There's a long string of boosters or benefactors that Fort Worth has had who love the city and have worked to put the city on the map. And you can go clear back to the beginning. B.B. Paddock is a man credited with inventing the tarantula map back in 1873 when he was dreaming of the future of Fort Worth. And not just one railroad line coming into Fort Worth, but 7 or 8 or 9, like a tarantula creature coming into Fort Worth. And at the time, it was kind of almost laughable. But yet B.B. Paddock was prophetic, seeing ahead, prescient, whatever you want to say. Paddock went on to become Mr. Fort Worth. Before that term was invented for Amon Carter, B.B. Paddock was Mr. Fort Worth. He helped bring the Texas Spring Palace to Fort Worth in 1889 and 1890. And the Texas Spring Palace helped put Fort Worth on the map nationally. You know, what do you mean? Because the Spring Palace advertised all over the country. It was aimed at attracting immigrants who hopefully would come to Fort Worth and go, wow, what a great city. Where can we get some land? And we would point them out to West Texas, which was about as empty then as it is now, and try to sell them land up in the Panhandle in West Texas. But that was a B.B. Paddock deal. Paddock was mayor of Fort Worth for a couple of times. So again, the original, if you will, Mr. Fort Worth. You know the name Benny Keith, apart from selling fruit and distributing beer. Well, Benny Keith was a booster in the same vein as Amon Carter and B.B. Paddock. Benny Keith was the wunderkind, the boy wonder, who at the age of 36 years old was sent down to San Antonio to talk to the Army to get Camp Bowie here in 1917. And you go, so what? Camp Bowie was the reason that the west part of Fort Worth developed. I'm not saying it was the first thing there, but as far as the development of the western edge of Fort Worth, it was Camp Bowie. Camp Bowie was as important in 1917 as a bomber plant was in 1940. And Benny Keith, a 36-year-old boy genius, was the one who took charge of the delegation to go down there and talk the Army into putting one of its training bases here, which obviously it worked. Charles Tandy. You know, when you go and wander and look at this building, it used to be the Tandy Center. If you go back to 1970, it was this Tandy Center. Before the Bass Brothers came along, Charles Tandy was a visionary that was going to remake downtown Fort Worth. And he almost did. He didn't so much run out of money as he didn't have some other key elements which the Bass Brothers bought. Beginning with the fact that, you know, if you spend time in downtown Fort Worth at night, all those nice gentlemen and maybe ladies you see wandering or roaming around on bicycles and helmets and uniforms are not Fort Worth police. They're Bass Brothers security. And there was no Tandy Brothers security. But as far as the idea of redeveloping downtown Fort Worth, before there was a Bass Brothers, there was a Charles Tandy. And more recently than that, let's come up to the Bass Brothers. I like to say I do walking tours of downtown Fort Worth. I like to say every city, every town needs a Bass Brothers. And if you're a Fort Worth resident and you don't like the power they have or the influence or how they can throw their weight around, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but I am saying, again, walk down and look at Sundance Square and Sundance Plaza, and if you go back far enough, remember what downtown Fort Worth used to look like. Can the Bass Brothers pretty much get whatever they want to? Absolutely. but you take the good with the bad. And this is why, again, I tell my tours, every city needs a Bass Brothers. There's an apocryphal story told about the Bass Brothers, that when they were developing Sundance Square and repaving the streets to make it look more historic, that the Bass Brothers looked down from their offices high on high and looked down on the street, and what they saw was not good. They did not like the kind of brick that were being used to repave Main Street. And so, as the story is told, they picked up the phone and called and talked to the mayor's office. And as the story is told, the next day the brick was pulled up and they used a different kind of brick to repave Main Street. Is that a true story? Maybe, maybe not. Could it happen, and does it tell you something about a family with the kind of power that can get that done, the good and the bad? Yes. And if you come up more currently, as far as you're looking at Fort Worth boosters and benefactors, Bob Simpson. The light just went out. Is that a signal? Bob Simpson. He's more than just the guy who helped reorganize and refinance the Texas Rangers. Bob Simpson and XTO. By the way, when you see XTO today, realize that that used to be Cross Timbers Oil. And now it's XTO Energy. Well, Bob Simpson and XTO have taken to saving downtown Fort Worth one building at a time. XTO owns either 6 or 7 buildings downtown, and they have restored most of them so far, working on others, to the way they looked when they were in their beautiful 50, 60, 75 year ago. Have you seen the Wagner building, the Sinclair building, the Transport Life building? If you walk around downtown Fort Worth, with or without a tour, just stop and look at those buildings and understand that what they are now goes back to Bob Simpson and when he was head of XTO. And I'm not beating the drum for Bob Simpson any more than I am for the Bass Brothers or Charles Tandy. Just understand that it takes people like that, benefactors and boosters, to create a city that people care about, to create them that something happens. And today, as long as I'm treading on thin ice to a point, you have the Hickman brothers, Brad and Holt. And some of us are a little concerned about what might be happening in the near future of the stockyards. If you follow the news, they're redeveloping the stockyards, and the Hickman brothers have this master plan for a massive redevelopment of the stockyards, hotels, restaurants, all sorts of stuff. And some of us are a little concerned about that, but, and it's a big but, understand that the stockyards wouldn't be what they are today, which is National Historical Registry and a good place to visit, if the Hickmans hadn't done so much of what they did back 20, 25, 30 years ago. So, you know, everything comes with good and bad. There's lemons, there's lemonade, there's good, there's bad. So anyway, the Hickmans are so far, and we give them a break, some of us do, in that helping to preserve the heritage that makes us very, very special. Cultural district. You've been there, you know the cultural district. We have the museums, specifically the 3 art museums in Fort Worth, are considered one of the finest cultural districts in this country. The Amon Carter, the Modern, and the Kimball. And not just they're nice museums for Fort Worth, they're nice for mid-sized city. These are jewel box kind of museums that attract interest not just here but in Europe. I've taught in Europe and spent time in Europe. And people know about the Modern Museum, people in the art know about Modern Museum and the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth. And that's one of those things that makes us, again, very, very, very special. Our distinctive, our Western heritage, the Fort Worth Herd. If you noticed, we're celebrating, I think, the 15th year of the Fort Worth Herd, going back to 1999. And again, if you spend any time in the stockyards, or if you are part of a tour, everybody wants to see the Fort Worth Herd. They want to get pictures of it. They want to sit on that big longhorn there and get a picture for the family, the people back home, whatever. Do you realize that when that herd was proposed, there were many people that said, that's the stupidest idea we've heard. You can't put longhorns in the middle of a city and drive them down the street twice a day, and that's a stupid idea. But there were certain people of vision who pushed it, and now it's one of the things that makes Fort Worth special. And again, I'm a homer, and I admit it, but you don't see longhorn herds being driven down any part of Dallas, do you? It actually might make things better in Dallas, but you don't see that. And you don't see that it's the only working longhorn herd in the country, which I think is pretty significant, because there are a lot of cities in the country which have a Western heritage. We have two new larger-than-life statues, the JFK statue, which was built largely with private money, and the Ripley Arnold statue, which we just dedicated fairly recently. I think it's interesting because the JFK statue, and go take a look at it. For those of us that have old-fashioned tastes, it's a very beautiful statue and a very emotional statue. And then again, and it sounds like it's just a slam fest on Dallas, but go look at the John F. at the Kennedy Memorial in Dallas. And ironically, to me at least, the Kennedy Memorial in Dallas was made by Philip Johnson, who was the same man that designed and built the Amon Carter Museum and also the, give me a hand here, the water gardens. Philip Johnson was the designer on that. Go look at the JFK Memorial in Dallas. And I understand it's got one of these concepts of these 4 blank walls, and you go in and you've got an empty space, and there's a flat memorial monument lying on the ground here, and there's not any decoration or whatever, and you contemplate and you think. To my limited dinosaur mind, I would rather look at a statue and a setting. And as for Ripley Arnold, we've been arguing for some of us, and way back before some of us were around, for decades, that it'd be nice if a city named Fort Worth after William Jenkins Worth, founded by Major Ripley Arnold, had a statue to one or both of them. Wouldn't that be nice if we had something to honor them? Oh, you have Worth Park down there, which hardly anybody realizes because it's across from the JFK statue, and everybody looks at the JFK statue and that memorial. But we finally now have a Ripley Arnold statue. And we argue and we moan and we twitch and we debate, does it look like Ripley Arnold? Does it not look like Ripley Arnold? What does he look like? Is it the right kind of pedestals, the right place? And argue and twitch and moan all you want, but we have it. And I'm reminded as a historian about what Theodore Roosevelt said about the Panama Canal. Roosevelt used to brag about while Congress was debating it, he built the Panama Canal. And I like to think that while some people were and would still be debating, what Ripley Arnold, what did it look like? Where should we put it? How should it work? That some people went and got it done. And I think that's very, very important. What else do we have? Only a semi-personal plug for myself because I'm part of it, but Oakwood Cemetery every year, every October, puts on a Saints and Sinners tour, at which time various ghosties of people buried in Oakwood Cemetery come to life for a weekend. And don't just come to life and give you a lecture about who this person is, but they are the person. They dress like the person, they present the person. And that's history on a level that's way beyond a history book or a formal lecture or whatever. And again, I know New Orleans does that. Boston does that. There's some other historic cities, Williamsburg, Virginia does that have this kind of a cemetery tours. But I don't know any of them around here, driving distance or anywhere in Texas, I could be wrong, who have a tour like that where you can see characters from Fort Worth history and talk to them. And I'm a big fan in visiting historic cemeteries and looking at the monuments and what's written on the monuments and reading them. But it's even better if you've got somebody who is at least for a few hours playing the character who can tell you that sort of stuff. Related to the above as far as history, one of my favorite debate points when I speak is that Fort Worth has more working historians than any other city our size. And I will be glad to argue, debate that because I feel like I know most of them. And by working historians, I mean people who are actually working on writing Fort Worth history. Every city has a historian or two. But Fort Worth has a whole gaggle or a whole group of working historians, and I'll tell you something, as a historian, this group shares and helps each other. And you go, well, so what? Trust me, historians, it's like putting a bunch of scorpions in a bottle as far as historians. This is mine, I'm not going to share it with you, and I would never, people all the time call me or I'll call them and say, I found something you can use. And that's one of the ways history gets written, is by that kind of cooperation. And believe me, it's not universal. In fact, any of you that were here this morning, and they're going to stay out for the whole program today, came out to hear 4 of those historians today. Or whether you stay and hear all 4 of us, or just 2 or 3, understand that having working historians, you can put together a program like this, is not normal. It is not, every city has that sort of stuff. So I think that's very, very special. And if we had more time and whatever, we could do a shout out to the other historians that are here, because again, the thing that they do, or we do, is you go out and support your fellow historians. Even if you're not on the program, you turn out and listen to them. And we've done, any of us who do history have done a few presentations where the only other people in the audience, if it wasn't Mom, was a couple of other historians who came out to support you, which is very important. Fort Worth has a well-deserved reputation for hospitality. On the Kennedys, when Jackie and JFK and Jackie Kennedy spent their last night on Earth, they spent it in what was then the Hotel Texas. And it wasn't just enough to put them up in the Hotel Texas and say, we're glad you're here, Mr. President, whatever. Fort Worth got together and redecorated with local art from local collections the entire Suite 850 in the Hotel Texas. Now, Suite 850 no longer exists because of various remodeling of the hotel and name changes, but the entire suite was dedicated, and the person who did it was Mrs. Carter or somebody, and this is my story, so I'll tell it the way I want, but who literally drove around in her car, her station wagon, and picked up a lot of the art. And you go, well, your art's smart, we're speaking classic $100,000 million pieces of artwork that were taken down to the hotel, put up on the walls of Suite 850 for that night, and when the Kennedys left the next day, they were taken down and returned to their owners. So you've got two miracles there. Number one is somebody who owns a multi-million-dollar piece of art saying, oh, sure, here, take it. Put it in the hotel down there, and be sure to bring it back to me. And that we would do that. We would do that. The Van Cliburn piano competition. Every 2 years, people come from all over the world to Fort Worth, Texas, not just because of Van Cliburn, the piano player, but because of Fort Worth hospitality. And because we do that. And a few years ago, I'll tell you a personal story that I haven't told to anybody before, which is a few years ago, one of the contestants, entrants, whatever their official name, one of the pianists playing was a young fellow from Hungary. And at the time, I had been teaching back and forth from Hungary and Vienna. And at the time that the Van Cliburn was that year, I had a Hungarian girl visiting me. And she was more than just a girl, actually, which is what it made it neat. She was the daughter of the head of the Hungarian Air Force, which is kind of, wow. But she was here visiting in Fort Worth. And she met the Hungarian pianist there, and they wound up getting married. And 15, 20 years later, they're still happily married, got kids, and I still talk to her, to them in Hungary and Budapest, and they met because of the Van Cliburn. Now, I don't know how many other romantic love stories you have because of Van Cliburn, but the fact that for those couple of 3 weeks out of every 2 years, the attention of the musical world focuses upon what goes on here in Fort Worth with the Van Cliburn competition. And other reasons why Fort Worth is special, kind of touching on it, but to focus in on it, the can-do spirit, the boosterism, the willingness to step out boldly, no, not space, the last frontier, but to step out boldly and take risks. And this goes clear back to the beginning, bringing the T&P Railroad to Fort Worth in the summer of 1876. You know the story about that? The story about how the railroad died somewhere out at Grand Prairie, and the clock was ticking and the charter was running out. You know how they got the railroad to Fort Worth? Fort Worth citizens went out there and built the last few miles of rail line into Fort Worth to get it here. I didn't say they hired a construction team, they brought in engineers. I said Fort Worth citizens went out and did the heavy work and the lifting and the track laying and the whole thing, while the women of Fort Worth made lunches or whatever they did. It was still a sexist age back then, but to get the railroad brought here, which is pretty amazing. So to bring the Spring Palace here. This Texas Spring Palace in 1889 was the first time anything like that had been put on in Texas. People from all counties and representatives, participants from all over Texas came to the Texas Spring Palace in Fort Worth, not just one season, but two, and brought their wares of their county and their town and whatever and put them on display. And people came from all over the country. If you look in the old newspapers, you can find advertisements in Massachusetts newspapers, Iowa newspapers, other newspapers all over the country advertising the Texas Spring Palace. Of course, part of the advertisement was come to Texas, see it, and buy land. But still, the fact that that was advertised all over. And the way they raised the money was partly railroad money, but one of the things that you run into when you look at Fort Worth history projects is a word called subscription. Now, I'd call it passing the hat or putting the strong arm on somebody. They used to call it subscription, which is the winter of 1889. January and February, meetings were called, and the citizens of Fort Worth met and were told, if we want to put on a spring palace, we're going to have to raise the money out of our pockets. You know, today you go in debt, the federal government pays for it, state pays for it, Medicare, somebody pays for it. It had to come out of the pockets of Fort Worth citizens who raised the money that winter to build the spring palace. And what was sad, funny, whatever, is they built it in April for an opening in May, and as soon as they got it up, a huge storm came in and blew it all out, blew it away and washed it out. They had to go back and come up with more money to quickly rebuild it to do it again. And that first Texas Spring Palace, 1889, ended in the red. All these big public building projects end in the red, but the citizens of Fort Worth dug in their pockets for a second year and brought it back in 1890. We brought Camp Bowie in 1917. I already talked about how Benny Keith went down to San Antonio to talk about that. We got the bomber plant here in 1940, again for a little politicking, a little elbow arm bending in Washington, D.C. 1936, Jan Jones is in the audience out here, getting Billy Rose and Casa Manana here. You realize the official city for the Centennial was Dallas. Dallas was awarded the Centennial. And Jan tells the story better than I do, but Amon Carter in Fort Worth said, well, hell, we're not going to let them do it. We'll put on our own Centennial. We'll call it the Frontier Centennial. And the famous line about for history, go to Dallas, for fun, come to Fort Worth. But we put our own Centennial right here. That kind of boosterism, that kind of can-do spirit. Building the convention center. You can argue architecturally, good idea, bad, but as far as building it, and if you want to talk about the size or what was involved in clearing the whole southern end of downtown and putting a convention center down there, go walk the streets. Go walk Commerce Street. When you get to the convention center, what does Commerce Street do? It goes around. They had to reorient, whatever the word is, the streets in the south end of Fort Worth to fit the convention center down there. Now, since my original topic of interest was Hell's Half Acre, and Hell's Half Acre centered on Commerce Street, Rusk Street, historically I kind of am sorry that they bent the street to fit the convention center, but that's how you get things done. And if you also trying to walk nowadays from used to be the courthouse was a straight shot down Main Street to the railroad, the TNP station. You could drive it, you could walk it, you could take a streetcar, and now you've got to pass through the plaza and you don't drive it anymore. And again, that's not just the power of the Bass Brothers, but the power to reimagine downtown Fort Worth. So yeah, that block right there where it passes through Sundance Plaza is different. And you could go, I could go, but I won't, on and on. Alliance Airport. You realize Fort Worth went up and annexed land out in the boondocks north of Fort Worth to build Alliance Airport and to start that. The Texas Motor Speedway, getting that here. And you can argue the wisdom financially, but keeping Radio Shack and Pier 1 here, and what had to be done to do it, good, bad, wish we knew now, then what we know now. Argue that if you want to. But taking the commitment to keep two international corporations, Pier 1 and Radio Shack in Fort Worth. And you've got a lot of mixed feelings about the Trinity River vision. And you can argue that all day. But the fact that you have this vision about the Trinity River is one of those things that makes Fort Worth special, that visionary sort of thing. And last on this little topic is, remember when Miss Texas pageant was held in Fort Worth every year? Some of you are going, Miss who, what? You know, who goes to mix? It used to be the Miss Texas pageant was a huge event. It was on television. In fact, it was broadcast nationally, and it was a huge event. And people went down every year to see the Miss Texas pageant, and they had the cameras on the stage and doing the spotlights and focusing on who's sitting on the front row. It was a huge event. It wasn't held in Dallas or Houston or San Antonio. It was held in Fort Worth. Last two things, kind of, sort of, because again, my list of stuff that you can think about goes on forever. In Fort Worth, we have a very collegial approach to solving problems. It doesn't mean we always come up with the best solution or we always solve it the best way, but we have a very collegial approach, coming together and working together. I'm working on a project now about the history of the black community in Fort Worth, and one of the things I've run into is what they used to call the Fort Worth Way. The Fort Worth Way referred to race relations. And the Fort Worth Way wasn't just something that white people said, it was something the black leaders and the white leaders both bragged about, that we weren't like Dallas. We didn't have bomb throwers and riots and all this kind of stuff. In Fort Worth, we have the Fort Worth Way. The races come together and they reason together and they work stuff out. Well, don't jump up. The reality of it is obviously that the white members of the group coming together usually told the black members what was going to happen. But the fact that they came together and did something, that they had something called the Fort Worth Way. And this story really stretches into when you get to 1970s and 1980s, and if you know the name John Wiley Price, or if you know the name Al Lipscomb in Dallas, Fort Worth used to brag that we didn't have a John Wiley Price or an Al Lipscomb. And if those names don't mean anything to you, that's 30, 40 years ago. But we used to brag. Now, did we need somebody? You got to have to read the book to get but just understand, though, the fact that we thought we had a special way of dealing with race relations. The I-30 overpass. Remember when you had the I-30 overpass that blocked the entire south end of Fort Worth, visually, development-wise, every otherwise? And when they were going to expand I-30, you know what they were going to do? They were going to expand the overpass. What's now the Water Gardens place, the old Montague's Warehouse is going to go, Frank Kent Cadillac, maybe the post office, we're all going to go to expand the overpass. And fortunately, saner heads prevailed, and they wound up taking the overpass down and moving the whole development. But to get that sort of thing done, getting the Omni Hotel built as a public-private project, another thing that was done. All this kind of stuff, public and private coming together, a collegial way trying to solve problems. Doesn't mean it solves it to everybody's happiness, but this stuff is being done. Fort Worth has been blessed with chutzpah and kismet in spades. And if you don't particularly get warm and fuzzy about the words chutzpah or kismet, a more earthy way of saying it is Fort Worth's always had a big set of brass ones. And I hope you will allow me to say that, because Fort Worth has always been willing to step up and do that kind of stuff. And the kind of luck that a Las Vegas gambler would kill of, would dream for. And maybe we've also had a guardian angel. And in that case, it's very suitable, again, if you take a stroll down the Sundance Plaza, Sundance Square, and look at the Bass Performance Hall. What are those two 48-foot things in front of Bass Performance Hall? A couple of angels. And I don't know what the Bass brothers had in mind or what David Schwartz did when he designed the building, but sometimes you have the feeling maybe there's a couple of taller than 48-foot angels looking down on Fort Worth, which has allowed us to do things. Compare us to our sister city to the east. Dallas is known for a TV show and an assassination. Fort Worth is known for cowboys and longhorns. There's a reason why Fort Worth has been the All-America city twice in our history. Fort Worth has been proclaimed one of the All-American cities. 1963 and 1993, I think, was the second time. To win that award once is very notable. Fort Worth has been an All-American city twice. So face it, you are living in a very unique city. I didn't say perfect. I didn't say the best. I didn't say there's no problems, everybody likes everybody. But just when you look at Fort Worth, both historically and just as at this point, about 800,000 people living in close proximity, we are a very special city with a very special history.
Tell us some Amon Carter stories.
Oh, Lordy. God, there's a million Amon Carter stories, and I'm not really an expert. The boss of my department at Northwest Campus, Brian Cervantes, got his dissertation from UNT. It's about 3 or 4 years ago. His dissertation was on Amon Carter, and he's planning to publish the book. And I've looked at it, and it's going to be very interesting. The only story I think of right offhand, if I had more time, there's a million, but when Carter put together Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and the competition, there was competition, Fort Worth, not the Fort Worth Morning Register, Fort Worth, anyway. Another rival newspaper, and again, you've caught me off base, but another major national syndicated group came to Fort Worth, this is before the Fort Worth Press, to create a rival newspaper to the Amon Carter hometown Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And one of the interesting stories I'm talking about in my research now is that the people who came in were all non-Fort Worthers. And they had the, whatever the huge syndicate was or the money behind them, but they brought on outside people who didn't understand how newspapers are written in Fort Worth. And again, you got to understand as I tell this story, so you don't chase me out of here throwing rocks at me, but that the project I'm working on is a black history of Fort Worth, or a history of the black community. And one of the things that the Amon Carter newspaper understood about its readers and the outside boys didn't is that in the Carter newspapers, when black people were referred to after the first name, what followed was always, or the first and last name, what followed was the first name. And you go, well, so what? No, not a last name and title, not Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so, or Mrs. So-and-so. Black people were referred to simply by a first name, occasionally a last name. And you go, say what? So the outside boys in the newspaper were doing black as well as white people in the news as Mr. or Miss. And at least what I read is that it had some people stirred up that these obviously weren't people who understood Fort Worth and Texas and didn't know how to write a newspaper. Is that why Carter's newspaper, Star Telegram, won and the other guys faded? I don't know, because you get the Fort Worth Press coming in the 1920s, which was a rival paper. But it's a story about Amon Carter, and if you talk to anybody who does Fort Worth history, like the lady sitting beside you, most of us have a million Amon Carter stories. I just can't remember any others right now. What else? What else? Yes, sir.
JFK statue in downtown, is that where he gave his final speech at the Fort Worth?
Yes, not exactly as where the statue is located, but he left the hotel that morning, walked across what was then a street. Now it's that drive under the porte-cochere of the hotel. It was a parking lot directly across from the entrance. They set up a truck, a flatbed truck, put a podium on the flatbed truck, and he gave his speech there. And what's interesting, if you've been down to see, if you go down and look at the statue, don't just look at the statue, which is, again, a beautiful statue. Look at the pictures behind it. And one of the pictures fascinates me. One of the pictures shows a very tall, distinguished-looking, well-dressed black man reaching out to the president. And the president it's almost like the Sistine Chapel, the hands of God and man coming together, because the president is reaching back to him. And you can see the Secret Service people behind the president. They don't look alarmed, they don't look worried, they're not like rushing up to who is this black person doing this, we need to do something. So obviously there's a comfort level there. And this man is, I swear, the biggest person you've ever seen if you look at those around him, not playing basketball. I don't know who he is. I don't know anybody in Fort Worth, including Bob Ray, who's been able to identify him so far, but I think it's great that you've got that picture of Kennedy in Fort Worth reaching out his hand on that last morning to a black man. But the short question, the answer is that was taken directly across what's the parking garage now for the hotel, was a surface parking lot, and they set up a flatbed truck and a podium there. What else? What else?
Why is the Ripley Arnold statue facing Fort Worth rather than facing the river where historically it said he stood?
Actually, and I'll say this and then I'm going to pass it off to, because the lady who played a key role in getting that done, the lady and man who played key roles in getting that done far more than me are sitting in the audience. But and again, Claire and I were arguing about this, the theory, the story that Ripley Arnold stood on the bluff of the Trinity and heard the footsteps, thundering footsteps coming behind him, is, depending on whether I want to make Clara mad, either mythical or apocryphal.
But it's in one of your books.
The book, The Fort That Became a City, says this is a myth. And the myth began that Robert E. Lee said it. And then in the book, The Fort That Became a City, I think I kind of debunked the myth that Robert E. Lee was ever in Fort Worth. He was in Texas, he was never in Fort Worth. It's anywhere on the record. So somewhere along the way it got shifted from Robert E. Lee said it to, well, Ripley Arnold must have said it. Because you can't have Joe Schmo that nobody ever heard of standing and saying something that profound. But why is he facing the river? Is there a short answer to that, Clara, Bob? Why he's facing the river or not? Not facing the river?
No, he's not facing the river. There was a lot of debate about which way that he would face. Because of where he was set, it didn't make sense to have him turn around and face the river. He's too close to the river. So we had him turn around and looking up on the hill where the fort was located. And it's just about that simple.
The way statues are located sometimes stirs up debate long after. The Custer statue in Monroe, Michigan, is Custer sitting on a horse. And the back of the statue faces City Hall, Public Square, whatever. And one of the jokes, if you visit and look at the Custer statue, is look at that horse's butt. And whether you're talking about Custer or his horse, why would you face the statue with the butt of the horse in the back of Custer facing City Hall? But it sure makes a good story if you're doing a tour up there. So I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody thought profoundly about which direction we're going to face Ripley Arnold. What else? Somebody had a question? Yeah.
Well, I've only been in Fort Worth a couple of years, but I've gone to the Sid Richardson Museum a couple of times. What's the history behind him?
Sid Richardson was another one of those very wealthy cattlemen, oilmen. In fact, the Bass brothers are part of the family descendants of Sid Richardson. Don't even ask me for but anyway, Richardson and Amon Carter were friends and both developed Western art collections, and Amon Carter got his museum first, and Richardson family got a museum, and the Amon Carter spread their collections to Americana, beyond just Remington, Russell, Western art, and Richardson's continued to focus on Western art, specifically Remingtons and Russells. Both of them very wealthy local cattlemen / oilmen who collected art and wanted to leave it when they left. What else? Somebody had another question, or yeah?
Yeah, there was a point in the 20s when Fort Worth was annexing a lot of rural communities. Why were they?
The point, what Renee's asking you is about Fort Worth annexing a lot of little communities. 1922, Fort Worth annexed about 4 or 5 communities. Arlington Heights, Arlington Heights, Riverside, Niles City was annexed in 1922. It's a matter of, and actually the TCU area was also annexed in 1922. Up until then it was a rural end of the line, end of the earth. So the TCU area, which wasn't called TCU area, was annexed in 22. It was a matter of the city growing, and again, part of that visionary thing is seeing if you want to grow a city, you've got to incorporate more land. And more land gives you land to grow on. It also gives you a tax base. It also gives you just the power that goes with more land. So why 1922? All those places, the city fathers had been working, angling at trying to annex them all for years and years. Arlington Heights, Riverside, the whole thing. It was, as far as I can say at this point, it all came together in 1922. There was an earlier mass annexation, or several places surrounding suburbs annexed in 1909. But 1922 was a big year. And if you look at the square mileage of Fort Worth, what it was 1921 and then 1923, it doesn't double, but it sure grows. The other side of that, real quickly, is that when you annex an area, you also annex all their problems. You annex the need for police work. You annex the need for city administration. You annex the need for sewage line. And again, going back to the same project I'm working on, in the case of those districts like Riverside, you annex your school system, which meant that since those school systems also had what we call then colored schools and white schools, what that meant is that Fort Worth suddenly has this much larger African American population and these colored schools, and what are we going to do with them? And the immediate answer to the Fort Worth School Board is nothing. We'll fit them into the same, if again, pardon me, I'm speaking historically, we'll fit them in the same colored school budget we already got and just spread the money a little thinner. And that created a whole other realm of issues. So when you annex a city, it's not just the land and the business and the growth of TCU, it's everything that goes with those communities. What else?
Well, this is kind of trivial, but you mentioned...
That's the name of my life, is trivial, right? Yes.
You mentioned being in your talk about Pete the Python, and that happened a year before I was born. My sister and my mother used to talk about that. It was a joke all the time in the family. Next door neighbor, my sister was, she was staying over with my sister one night, when they were all girls, and while I was all going on, my mother came in and kidded and joked down just for late at night at bedtime, just before they went to sleep, said, Pete's peeking in the window at you and scared them to death. They couldn't go to sleep that night. But, so do you have any anecdotes or stories about that?
Was that 56 or 57 when Pete, do you remember anybody? Ruth?
You may know that I have connection
With Pete?
My husband, no, my husband was the curator at the Fort Worth Zoo. And that was, as you might expect if you knew the zoo director at the time, a totally fabricated publicity stunt.
Yeah, the hoopla was fabricated. As I understand, Pete did get out of his cage, but when they found him, he was right there. He hadn't even gotten out of the zoo area, I don't think.
No, he was hidden in the zoo.
Oh, okay.
You may remember too that director supposedly disappeared during a balloon flight, and when he went to, I think it was Saudi Arabia, and we don't know whatever happened to him. He was quite a character.
Apparently so. Python's revenge. But again, the idea, and most Fort Worth people knew very little about pythons. What are they? But they're big, mean, ugly snakes. If you ever watch the science fiction channel, they eat whole villages on the Sci-Fi Channel. So I'm sure in 1955, 56, whatever it was, the idea of this giant snake crawling around devouring children around Fort Worth, true or not, was a hell of a good story. Because if you look it up, it was covered by other newspapers. And Fort Worth never, ever missed an opportunity to get our name out in other newspapers, other
It
cities.
certainly increased the zoo attendance,
Oh, and that's another good thing.
especially when they.